Prison reform is something that affects all Americans. Whether you know an inmate, you've heard the story of an inmate, or even if you've been an inmate, prisons affect all of our lives. As the system is today, many inmates face less of a chance to succeed in the real world. During imprisonment, inmates can't always get the help that they need. Rehabilitation and re-education could help their chances. After their incarceration time is up, many inmates don't have a lot of ways to restart their lives. Thus, they return back to the known. If we were to help with re-entry to society, many inmates could lead better lives. Lastly, some punishments that inmates face while in prison, such as solitary confinement, are detrimental to their health and can nullify any help being offered. Thus, if we want to maintain the integrity of our judicial system, something must change within our prisons.
Prisons have been an American issue since the country's beginning. In 1787, the Pennsylvania Prison Society was formed after the wretched conditions of a local jail were revealed. The society fought for the termination of the use of bribery of jail guards and called for legislative action for this to end. Then, in the 1800s, Dorothea Dix toured prisons around the nation and found that many prisoners were mentally ill and couldn't be held accountable for their actions. Consequently, she fought for the establishment of mental hospitals and helped take the mentally unstable out of prisons and put them in institutions that would actually benefit them. Later on, in 1986, was the infamous McMillan v. Alabama case. In this case, an African-American man was charged with the death penalty for a crime he didn't commit. He spent 6 years on death row before he was finally acquitted in 1993. In all of these instances, prisoners were treated unjustly, but we were able to come together as a nation and mend the prominent issues in our prisons. Now we have to repeat history and restore our prisons again.
Prisons should be more than just a time out from life. Rather than imprisonment being a punishment, it should be a chance for rehabilitation. If prisoners are re-educated, it will be easier to reintroduce them into society. If they can find a place to fit in, then they'll likely become beneficial, proactive members of their community. This improved societal status will help former inmates stay out of prisons, which will help lower prison populations. Right now, 44% of inmates who have been released end up back in prisons after 5 years. However, with better reintroduction to society, repeated offenders could be reduced.
You give them the opportunity to do whatever they may choose to improve their lives and rehabilitate themselves, then all of the science, all of the studies show that recidivism drops. So, while yes, we see a lot of it in the system, it's because the system itself is built to be a revolving wheel. Because once you get out of prison, it's hard to get a job, right? Because you have a record. It's hard to get a loan. It's hard to rent a place. It's hard to find anything other than going back to the life that you had before, right? Because you don't have to have all of those things to make it there.
Another positive reformation to prison systems could be cutting back on the sentences of solitary confinement. Being alone all day, every day, has adverse effects on human psychology and physical health.
Solitary is probably the most cruel and vicious, non-physical form of torture that a human being can inflict upon another human being. To place a person and confine a person to a 9x6 area for 23 hours out of a day. And during that time, you have to fight for your own sanity, but you also have to watch other men around you become insane, and men hurt themselves, and some men took their own lives.
A lot of the clients that we've had have been placed in solitary confinement or the hole, as they'll call it, and always not for, the reasons that those cells should be used for. A lot of times we're seeing it happen because there's some kind of dispute between roommates, and instead of investigating and getting the information or giving some kind of dispute resolution, they just put them in solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement should have reduced days and should be divided over a period of specified time. This will help the mental health of inmates and help them be productive members of society if and when they are released.
To accomplish reform in reentry tactics and solitary confinement conditions, new laws will have to be passed. Those laws will shorten or limit solitary confinement sentences and help prisoners reintegrate into society. A good example of a bill for reentry purposes is one sponsored by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called the Mercy and Reentry Act.
So this does the same exact thing where it says you cannot be discriminated against because you paid your debt to society some time ago. You fulfilled that obligation. We should extend our social safety net to you as well.
Prison reform is something that is greatly needed within the American prison system. The system is unjust, and prisoners encounter problems that make life after prison difficult, if not impossible. The impacts of prison reform are immeasurable. Society as a whole will be beneficially impacted by rehabilitation reform because former inmates will have more of a chance to become dedicated citizens who can positively contribute to their communities. Another impact would come from the solitary confinement reform, with the improved mental health of inmates. With new reform laws, we would be able to make prison time less about the punishment itself and more about letting inmates learn from their actions and change to become a more useful addition to society once again.